Week 3, Lesson 4, Inspirations for Superman. Superman is called a modern myth by many, but the idea of Superman isn't fully original. It's a compilation of many other existing characters, stretching back for thousands of years. The earliest ones are probably the biblical or Jewish myths, myths like Moses. The story of Moses comes from the biblical book of Exodus. Moses was a Jewish baby who was put into a basket in the river and ended up in the care of an Egyptian pharaoh's family. There, he gained a position of power and later, thanks to God, obtained supernatural powers, which he used to protect the lower caste of Egypt, known today as the Jews. Moses used his power to alter Egyptian cultural influences by helping turn water into blood, killing the firstborns, destroying their crops and livestock, etc. If you thought Superman was acting like a criminal when he was dealing with traffic, then what might the actions of Moses look like in comparison? Moses shows that you can rough up a civilization to try and change its ways, something early Superman was not afraid to do. Remember in the video about Siegel and Schuster when I mentioned that they were both Jewish? Well, there's a good chance that they grew up with these stories. Another biblical story is one from the book of Judges about Samson, whose long hair gave him superhuman strength. Samson was the last of the Hebrew judges and was gifted with superhuman strength used to defeat his enemies. He killed a lion, he defeated an entire army using only a donkey's jawbone, and destroyed a pagan temple. His weakness was that if he cut his hair, he'd lose his strength. One night, a beautiful woman seduced him and cut his hair. When his hair was cut, he became captured and had his eyes burnt out. He died when his hair grew back and he collapsed the temple on his captors. The name Samson also roughly translates to man of the sun in ancient Hebrew, which is a description that could fit Superman as the character evolved. There is another famous Hebrew belief that could have influenced Superman and the ideas of superheroes in general. There's the myth of the Golem, and importantly, the tale of the Golem of Prague. A golem is a creature created out of clay, which was used to do its master's bidding. The Golem of Prague was a creature brought to life by a rabbi in the slums, who used it to protect the Jews against anti-Semitic attacks. In addition to his strength, some versions of the story have the golem turning invisible or summoning spirits. The Golem was also one of the first movie monsters, starring in the first monster film trilogy, but 2 of the movies have been destroyed, so its legacy isn't as large as some of the other movie monsters. However, there is a chance that both Siegel and Schuster saw those films, or at least knew about the creature because of their upbringing. The other biblical influence for Superman were Jesus Christ and the angels. Angels were warriors of God. However, over time, they became depicted less as warriors in popular culture and depicted more as messengers. God brings hope. Angels are the messengers of God. Therefore, angels are the messengers of hope. Superman is also a messenger of hope. He's not afraid to be a warrior, he's not afraid to get his hands dirty, and like angels, he had enormous strength and could fly. Plus, he would always fight on the side of right, much like the angels would always fight on the side of God, who, if the Bible was to be believed, is always on the side of right. The final biblical influence I'm going to talk about is Jesus. Jesus had extraordinary powers and tried to change the world. He had a father who wasn't from this world, he was sent here to see how we lived, and his deeds ended up changing the world. Remember, Siegel and Schuster were Jewish, and the main difference in belief between Judaism and Christianity is that Christians believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Savior, and that his teachings and actions have saved humanity. Jews believe that Jesus is not the Messiah or the Savior, and that the actual Messiah hasn't yet come. Siegel and Schuster created their own character to fill that role. Every time Superman became involved in a problem, the outcome would improve because of his involvement. Superman was never shown as greedy. He could have used his fame to make a wealthy life for himself, to get all the women he wanted, and to rule a country if he had any desire to do so. But Superman was humble, and preferred people learn from his example instead of him shoving his teachings down everyone's throats. After the biblical tales, we have the tales of Greek mythology. The most obvious connection is Hercules. Hercules has superhuman strength. He was brave, he was forced to work for a cowardly king, he wore the skin of a nearly invincible lion on his back for protection. He traveled the land, showing amazing feats of strength, and became a celebrity. He also had a side quest with Jason the Argonauts. He was larger than life, and like Superman and Jesus, Hercules had a father who wasn't human. Hermes, or Mercury, had super speed, and he could move faster than anyone on Earth. So we have a god who is known for how quick he was. Apollo, the sun god, flew above the earth in his chariot, shining down light on everyone beneath him. So we have a god that had the power of flight. Let's look at an Eastern myth. Now there's no guarantee that Siegel and Schuster had ever heard of this god, but I think it's worth noting to show how major cultures are influenced by characters with powers. From India, there is Krishna. Krishna is a blue deity who is often seen as an avatar of Hindu's head god, Vishnu. Instead of growing up as a farmer in Kansas, Krishna grew up as a cowherder. As Krishna grew up, he kept killing demons and eventually became a prince. After participating in a war that cost hundreds of lives, Krishna meditated under a tree. Once he reached adulthood, Krishna never seemed to age. Again, there's some notable similarities here. The father, who was better than human, the blue, the upbringing alongside humble farmers, the ability to solve almost every situation with ease, and being so powerful that he's almost invincible. But the influence of Superman isn't limited to mythic deities in the Bible. The name Superman had been used by the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. This is what the Encyclopedia Britannica says about Nietzsche's Superman. Alternate title, Übermensch. Superman, German Übermensch. In philosophy, the superior man who justifies the existence of the human race. Superman is a term significantly used by Friedrich Nietzsche. This superior man would not be a product of long evolution, rather he would emerge when any man with superior potential completely masters himself and strikes off conventional Christian herd morality to create his own values, which are completely rooted in life on this earth. From what we've seen so far about Siegel and Schuster's Superman, this seems like a fairly accurate description of the character, and with the name Superman, this probably is not coincidental. But Superman has something that most deities and messianic figures don't: a constant secret identity. Clark Kent is what separated Superman from many of the myths before him, which is a brilliant move on the creator's part. If you relate to the overconfident strongman hero that is Superman, you'd like the book. If you relate to the quieter, timid, but smart Clark Kent who doesn't allow society to see his true strength, then you'd probably like the book. Clark Kent and Superman ensure both demographics have something to read. However, Superman wasn't the first fictional vigilante to have a secret identity. First released in 1905, The Scarlet Pimpernel is usually agreed on as the first time when a character was a vigilante and had a civilian identity. It was about an English aristocrat during the French Revolution who put on a mask and practiced his sword-fighting skills. The play was a huge success in Britain. The next influential character with a secret identity was Zorro, who first appeared in the book The Curse of Capistrano in 1919. Another rich swashbuckler, he acts like a fool so that people don't realize his true identity. Finally, there's the Lone Ranger, who was created in 1933, a vigilante who was the only Texas Ranger to survive an ambush. An Indian named Tonto finds him barely alive and nurses him to health. He wears a mask to honor his brother, who was also killed in the ambush, and tracks down the gang that ambushed them. After he defeats the gang, he continues his adventures with Tonto as the Lone Ranger. There are tales of gods taking on human form to interact with people, but they almost never take on the same form twice, where Clark Kent was Superman's civilian identity for the entirety of his career. Superman also had his origins in other pulp heroes, most notably John Carter of Mars and Doc Savage. John Carter of Mars is almost a reverse Superman story. It's about a man who goes to Mars, and he finds out that the lower gravity there gives him super strength and the ability to leap long distances. He becomes an inspiration for some of the fractions of Mars. He easily overpowers many of his enemies and fights the good fight. Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze, was created in 1933 in a pulp magazine. He had skin and hair that was the color of bronze, and almost was always shown on magazine covers with a torn shirt. He is an overachiever. He's a physician, surgeon, scientist, adventurer, inventor, explorer, researcher, and musician. He's also the master of disguise, a master of martial arts, has great human strength and endurance. He would fight villains determined on world domination, and fight what seemed to be fantasy monsters, but would always have scientific explanations to them. A giant spider was revealed to be a blimp, and so forth. When he defeated villains, he'd give them brain operations to stop them from being criminals, and they'd go on their way with life. So between these two characters, we have someone who's stronger than everyone else on the planet and can leap across landscapes, and we have a hero who can do anything he puts his mind to, who's made himself physically and mentally better than everyone else around him, who uses his skills to save the world. There were also other characters from more respected works of literature with amazing abilities. Peter Pan had the ability to fly. Dracula had above average strength, the ability to turn into animals in fog, and the ability to almost instantly hypnotize people. Dr. Jekyll was able to temporarily alter his appearance by drinking a potion and becoming Mr. Hyde. The picture of Dorian Gray was about a man whose picture aged and became wounded instead of him, making Dorian Gray almost immortal. The Victorian literature had these characters with powers, but those characters never used their abilities for the greater good. There was also one more character who helped inspire Superman. That was Popeye, a comic book character who gained super strength from eating spinach. He'd then punch out people who were picking on him and his friends. So, in this video, we've established that no one single aspect of Superman was original. Superman was an accumulation of many different ideas, joined together to create a character that seemed incredibly original for his time. But you have to remember that information and source material was much harder to get in the 1930s than it was today, and a lot of Americans, especially young Americans, would be unfamiliar with non-biblical inspirations for the character. Questions to contemplate. Can you think of a character or myth that might have affected Superman that was not mentioned in this video? Does Superman offer any original ideas, or was he just a unique mixture of pre-existing characters? What effects, if any, do you think Siegel and Schuster's religious upbringing have on the character? Jesus Christ was born over 2,000 years ago. Superman was created in America during the Great Depression. Who do you think was more relevant to the problems of the youth in the 1930s? Explain your answer.